Hey everyone, before we dive into this story, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. If you're dealing with housing issues, whether you're struggling with an unresponsive landlord, facing unfair rent increases, dealing with eviction threats, or just trying to understand why housing has become so impossible to afford, this channel is for you. We break down the policies and the politicians that are making your life harder, and we give you the information you need to fight back. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's hold these people accountable together. All right, let's talk about one of the most infuriating aspects of Florida's housing crisis, and that's the role that Governor Ron DeSantis has played in protecting corporate landlords while ordinary Floridians have lost their homes. This isn't speculation. This isn't partisan spin. This is documented fact. We can trace specific policy decisions, specific pieces of legislation, specific actions by the DeSantis administration that have consistently favored large corporate landlords and real estate investors at the direct expense of renters and working families. And the result has been devastating. Let's start with who we're talking about when we say corporate landlords, because this is important context. We're not talking about the person who owns a duplex and rents out the other unit. We're not talking about someone who inherited property and rents it out for extra income. We're talking about massive corporations, private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, entities that own thousands or even tens of thousands of residential properties across Florida and across the country. Companies like Invitation Homes, American Homes for Rent, Progress Residential, Pretium Partners, Blackstone. These are Wall Street firms that have bought up huge swaths of residential real estate and turned housing into a financial asset to be exploited for maximum profit. These corporate landlords operate completely differently than traditional small landlords. They use algorithms to set rents, coordinating price increases across entire markets. They have legal teams that specialize in evictions and can process them at industrial scale. They often provide minimal maintenance and use their size to avoid accountability. They lobby aggressively for policies that benefit them and against anything that would protect tenants. And they have a massive amount of capital that allows them to outbid regular families trying to buy homes, which is how they accumulated so much property in the first place. In Florida specifically, corporate landlords went on an unprecedented buying spree over the past several years. When the housing market crashed in 2008, these firms bought up foreclosed properties at rock-bottom prices. Then during and after the pandemic, they continued buying aggressively, often paying cash and offering above asking price, making it impossible for regular families to compete. In some Florida neighborhoods, corporate landlords now own 30, 40, 50% or more of the single-family homes. Entire subdivisions that were built for homeownership have been converted into rental properties owned by a handful of massive corporations. Now, you would think that a governor who claims to care about families and freedom and the American dream would see this as a problem, right? You would think he'd be concerned about Wall Street firms buying up neighborhoods and converting homeownership opportunities into permanent rental properties. You would think he'd want to do something to protect Florida families from predatory corporate landlords. But DeSantis did the exact opposite. At every single opportunity, he sided with the corporate landlords against Florida renters. Let's go through specific ways DeSantis protected corporate landlords. First, and this is huge, he supported and signed legislation that preempted local rent control across Florida. In 2023, the Florida legislature passed a bill that essentially banned cities and counties from implementing any form of rent stabilization or rent control, even in emergency situations. Several Florida cities have been considering rent control measures because rents were increasing so dramatically that people were being displaced en masse. Local elected officials, who actually represent their communities and understand local conditions, wanted the ability to implement emergency protections. And DeSantis and the legislature said, no, you can't do that. We're taking that power away from you. The justification given was that rent control doesn't work, that it would discourage housing development, that it would hurt the market. But you know who was really pushing for this preemption law? Corporate landlords and their lobbying groups. They spent millions on lobbying and campaign contributions to get this passed because rent control, even modest rent stabilization that limits how much rent can increase in a single year, would directly impact their profits. They want the ability to raise rents as much as they want whenever they want, and DeSantis gave them that. The impact of this has been catastrophic for renters. Without any limits on rent increases, corporate landlords have imposed truly shocking rent hikes. We're talking about increases of 50%, 75%, even doubling rents in some cases. People who have lived in the same apartment for years, who have been good tenants, who have always paid on time, are suddenly getting notices that their rent is going up by $1,000 or more per month, and they have no recourse. They can't appeal to their city government for protection because the state has prohibited cities from helping them. They either pay the increase or they leave. And if they leave, where do they go? Every other rental property is experiencing the same thing. Second, DeSantis supported legislation that made evictions faster and easier for landlords. Florida already had some of the weakest tenant protections in the country and some of the fastest eviction processes. But corporate landlords wanted even less protection for tenants and even faster evictions, so they could turn over properties more quickly and remove anyone who couldn't keep up with rent increases. The legislature obliged, streamlining the eviction process further and removing what few protections existed. The result has been an eviction crisis. Florida now has one of the highest eviction rates in the country. Corporate landlords are filing evictions at an industrial scale. In some cases, they're filing for eviction if rent is just a few days late, not even giving tenants a reasonable chance to catch up. They're evicting people for minor lease violations. They're using eviction as a tactic to clear out long-term tenants who are paying below market rent, so they can bring in new tenants at higher rates. And the eviction process is so fast that tenants barely have time to respond or seek legal help before they're being physically removed from their homes. Every eviction is a family losing their home. It's kids being pulled out of school. It's people losing their jobs because they no longer have stable housing. It's the destruction of lives and communities. And DeSantis made it easier for corporate landlords to do this. Third, DeSantis has consistently opposed any legislation that would regulate corporate landlords or require them to maintain properties adequately. There have been proposals in the Florida legislature to require corporate landlords to register with the state, to be transparent about their ownership structures, to maintain properties to certain standards, to respond to maintenance requests within reasonable time frames. All of these are common sense measures that would provide basic protections for tenants. And DeSantis and his allies have blocked or gutted every single one. Corporate landlords are notorious for poor maintenance. They extract maximum rent while putting minimal money back into the properties. Tenants report air conditioning that doesn't work in Florida summers, plumbing problems that go unfixed for months, mold and pest infestations, structural issues that pose safety hazards. And when tenants complain or try to withhold rent until repairs are made, the landlords threaten eviction. Without strong tenant protections and enforcement mechanisms, renters have almost no power to force landlords to maintain properties. DeSantis could have pursued policies to address this, like providing renters with tax credits to offset the property taxes they're indirectly paying, or taxing corporate-owned residential property at even higher rates, and using that revenue to fund affordable housing. He hasn't done any of that. The tax structure continues to favor homeowners over renters and does nothing to discourage corporate ownership of residential housing. 6. Let's talk about the lobbying and the money, because this is where it gets really clear why DeSantis has been so protective of corporate landlords. These companies and their industry groups have poured enormous amounts of money into Florida politics. They've made massive campaign contributions to DeSantis and to Republican legislators. They've funded political action committees. They've hired armies of lobbyists who have constant access to lawmakers. They've funded think tanks and policy organizations that produce reports arguing against tenant protections and for corporate landlord-friendly policies. And it works. When you look at the legislation that's passed, when you look at the regulations that have been rolled back, when you look at the enforcement actions that haven't happened, there's a direct correlation with what corporate landlords wanted. They wanted rent control ban. They got it. They wanted easier evictions. They got it. They wanted no limits on their acquisitions. They got it. They wanted minimal regulation and oversight. They got it. DeSantis has given them everything they asked for. Meanwhile, tenant advocacy organizations, housing justice groups, the actual people being harmed by these policies, they don't have millions of dollars for lobbying and campaign contributions. They have people power. They have their stories. They have their votes. But in Florida's current political system, money talks louder than votes, and corporate landlords have the money. The human cost of DeSantis protecting corporate landlords is staggering. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in people's lives. There's a family in Tampa, both parents working full-time. They've been renting the same house for 8 years. It's not fancy, but it's their home. Their kids go to the local school. They're part of the community. Then the house gets sold to a corporate landlord. Within months, their rent increases by $1,200 a month. They can't afford it. They try to negotiate, but the corporation doesn't negotiate. They're given 60 days to either pay the new rent or leave. Where are they supposed to go? Every other rental in the area is similarly expensive because corporate landlords own most of them and they're all raising rents. The family ends up moving an hour away to find something affordable. The kids have to change schools. Both parents now have brutal commutes. Their entire life is there's a teacher in Atlanta living in an apartment owned by a corporate landlord. Air-conditioned warehouse. She submits a maintenance request. Nothing happens. She follows up. Still nothing. It's over 90 degrees in her apartment. She has health issues that make heat dangerous for her. She tries calling the emergency maintenance line. No response. She tries withholding rent until the AC is fixed. The corporate landlord immediately files for eviction. She gets a notice that she has to appear in court. She's terrified. She ends up paying the rent and just suffering through the heat for 3 months until they finally send someone to fix the AC. This is the power imbalance that DeSantis has enabled. There's a veteran in Jacksonville who came home from serving his country and bought a small house. He had a stable VA loan and was building equity. Then the neighborhood started getting bought up by corporate landlords who converted the houses to rentals. Property values went crazy. His property taxes tripled. His homeowner's insurance quadrupled because insurance companies were fleeing Florida. He couldn't afford the costs anymore. He had to sell. He tried to find another place to buy, but couldn't compete with corporate cash offers. Now he's renting from a corporate landlord, paying more in rent than his mortgage used to be, building no equity, with no stability. His American dream was stolen by the very forces DeSantis protected. There are elderly people on fixed incomes being displaced from homes they've rented for decades because corporate landlords bought the properties and jacked up rents. There are single mothers working multiple jobs and still unable to afford rent after corporate landlords impose massive increases. There are young people who will likely never be able to buy a home because corporate landlords have bought up so much housing stock and driven prices beyond what working people can afford.